And hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Got a great program for you today. It is crunch time in the 2024 presidential race. And the real fight isn't just about winning the states, it's about capturing key counties that could swing the entire election in those counties, which then helps you win that particular state and then win the entire election. We're going to dig into that as well. But also, take a look at this.
That's what happened about in 2020, because that's when the ballots, and they started stuffing them ballots and people stuffing them. Bruce was paying people to do just that. Drop off.
Yeah, drop off. That is Joel Caldwell. This is a jaw-dropping undercover video. It's a Democrat operative, Joel Caldwell is. He spills the beans, so to speak, on how elections in Georgia were allegedly manipulated in 2020. Part of it was him. Caldwell, caught on tape, details this coordinated scheme that ranged from ejecting Republican poll watchers at the State Farm Arena to conducting ballot harvesting in nursing homes. And we'll play the whole thing, well, a big chunk of it, not the whole thing, but a big chunk of it in a moment. But his admission even verifies claims that were made in 2000 Mules, that film by Dinesh D'Souza. And he says, listen, I know some of the people in that film. I identified the vehicle in the film as part of their operations, is what he says. So we're going to deal with that in just a minute as well. So stay tuned for that. That is coming up in just a moment. And then we're going to speak in detail about the campaigns of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, their election strategies, honing in on the various counties in the various states. John Celik, the CEO of Harbor Strategic Public Affairs, is going to join me in a few moments as well. That's just a few seconds away, and we'll get into some of today's headlines after that conversation. Also, I want to remind you this: you are invited to a special election night watch party at Tom Jordan Live headquarters. We will be broadcasting for 4 hours straight on November the 5th. That is election night from 8 p.m. until midnight, watching the returns come in from around the country, starting, of course, on the East Coast here. We're located in the Eastern time zone near Detroit, Michigan. So, and many of the battleground states are in the Eastern time zone. So who knows? I mean, we could have the results by the time our broadcast is wrapped up on election night, although it might take a few days. We don't know just yet. But you can be here. Join me downtown Brighton, Michigan, in the Metro Detroit area. It's the Speak Easy Studios, downtown Brighton. More information is going to be posted at tomjordanlive.com, and drinks and food are also going to be provided. We're working with our next door neighbor, our partner in this Label. It's a restaurant next door, and they got a lot of monitors up as well. We'll be streaming the Tom Jordan Live broadcast there as well, and you're welcome to come into the studios here, into the headquarters here in Brighton, Michigan, the Speak Easy Studios. Also, just a reminder to chime in. We really want to hear from you today. You can comment, you can ask questions in the comment section, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or on X, and maybe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. We'll get to those in a moment. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe, like the videos, click that notification bell, but watch the videos and share them. That is a huge help. It's free of charge. All you got to do is watch and share and like. That'd be tremendously helpful. All right. Let's get into this. This guy, Joel Caldwell, a Georgia Democrat and an activist and the director of operations for the Coalition for the People's Agenda in Georgia, admits in this undercover video and walks the undercover investigator, the journalist here, through the mechanics of election manipulation and how they stole the race in 2020 in the state of Georgia. Take a look at this.
That's what happened about in 2020, because that's when the ballots, and they started stuffing them ballots and people stuffing them ballots, and they got videotape of it. But because nobody talks about it. That's why Trump been making that big deal about it, because you see it on videotape. It's like, come on. We see the man pull up and put 100 ballots in his box. You can't do this shit. So Bruce is paying people to do just that. Drop off ballots. Go around, collect ballots, collect absentee ballots, drop them off.
How did that even
work?
Okay, so if you're paying someone, I'm not trying to do this, trust me, but if you're a group and you're paying someone to pick up the absentee ballots, do people take their absentee ballots to the wards? and then the orgs distribute the pay. That's confusing. It doesn't make sense.
No, it's like, let's say you're my canvasser. I tell you to go around and pick up these absentee ballots from this area. You know, you go pick them all up and drop them off in the box. You know, and, no different. I pay you every week like a canvasser. You just get paid like a canvasser. You know, you're on the clock for however many hours, driving around, picking up absentee ballots and putting them in ballot boxes.
What information do you need to actually
Would-
know that these are certain areas that have a lot of absentee
Oh, I mean, when that's the case, you would just have to have, you would either have to reach it, like if some groups was reaching out to the folks beforehand, so they were passing them out to other people, and then coming back and getting them all. Going down to a senior house,
Yeah.
give everybody a ballot, and come back and collect all their ballots and turn it in on. And then you take the ballots and then drop them off.
And then the groups would have whoever, the canvassers go and pick them up and then take them straight.
Yeah, you can't do that. That's the illegal
Okay.
part. So think about it like this: if you're going to steal an election, let's say Georgia, this is the perfect example. You're going to steal an election here. You're not going to go to the outside of the Democratic Party, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to go outside of Atlanta or outside the metro Atlanta and change the numbers in the Republican counties, right? Because that should have just been too obvious. Change the numbers in your home. You can fluctuate these numbers because it'll just look the same.
It makes more sense to do it in Atlanta.
It hides better. So like if somebody's coming behind you and saying, well, you've been stealing votes, the first place they're gonna look is in the outline count where it's red. Don't change those numbers, right? Because then it'll flip that county that's always been red to blue.
Which
right?
will raise the flag.
Which will raise that flag.
Okay.
If you come here to the city where it's already 1.5 million voters, and then you just increase the numbers of your already places that you want. So you want to inflate the numbers that you already have versus trying to go to a red area and inflate those numbers, because that would just obviously look wild,
So you need to start planning 4 years in advance.
If you're trying to steal
Yeah.
an election, because you got to get a lot.
Dude, it makes sense. But after 2016,
You got to pay a
people
lot.
are mad.
You got to pay a lot of people to get in the pockets.
Yeah, I want to thank Steven Crowder. He's the one that broke this and put out that video. So you can watch the whole thing, I believe, on his website, and he put it out on Twitter or X as well. And I'm not sure if this guy, Joel Caldwell, still has a job anymore with the Coalition for the People's Agenda in Georgia, because I went to his website and the About Us page, his bio and whatnot, that's all been stripped away. His LinkedIn page seems to be gone as well. So, but what he's done here is Joel Caldwell. It's a confession of manipulating the election in 2020, and it was a process. So let's break it down a little bit. He admits that Democrats used a fake water main break at the State Farm Arena, or the water main break in general, to eject the Republican poll watchers during the 2020 election, giving them time alone to handle the ballots without oversight. They said we all went outside. The Republicans went back to their headquarters, and the Democrats went back in and resumed counting and then started stuffing the ballots, is what he says. If you want to watch the whole video, go back and watch it. And this confession by him reveals this calculated effort to eliminate transparency. The elections obviously rely on bipartisan poll watching to ensure the integrity of the count and whatnot. And removing the GOP watchers obviously undermines the credibility of every ballot process during that time. And if transparency is sacrificed, so is the legitimacy of the results. So it's still okay to question the legitimacy. Obviously, this is all alleged behavior. So we can say alleged and still be free from some, attorney general or the FBI knocking on your door saying you can't talk about this. No, we're alleging this is a possibility that this happened. And the nursing home issue, okay, he admits that's illegal what they did. The ballot harvesting in nursing homes and the forgery. He said, we forged them. So Caldwell, he was detailing how they targeted the nursing homes in Georgia, in the metro Atlanta area, primarily Democratic stronghold, to boost the numbers there, collecting the ballots from the residents and then returning them en masse. And that is illegal to do in the state of Georgia. but they did it. And that whole tactic, exploiting those who may not fully understand their vote, turning the senior citizens into pawns for a political gain. And here's another thing that he does in this video. If you watch the whole thing, he verifies the film 2,000 Mules by Dinesh D'Souza. He not only validates the whole thing, that narrative in 2,000 Mules, but claims to have identified one of the vehicles in the documentary as belonging to a union member that was involved in the ballot harvesting and in the ballot drops. He knew the guy, he says. And the whole corroboration here reinforces the validity of that film. If you haven't seen 2,000 Mules, it's revealing. These things are caught on videotape. And the media came out right away and dismissed the whole thing as disinformation and conspiracy theory. But this testimony obviously discredits those dismissals by the media of the documentary as somehow a conspiracy theory, even though we're seeing it with our own eyes. And when these insiders admit to recognizing people involved, it becomes harder to ignore the need for a thorough investigation into organized election fraud, alleged organized election fraud. And then you look at the urban center there in Atlanta, Georgia, and the manipulation of the votes there, and then the counting of the votes in Atlanta, the biggest population, of course, in the state of Georgia. And he describes how Democrats inflated the numbers in those metro areas like Atlanta instead of the Republican counties because they don't want to raise the red flags. They wanted to avoid suspicion. And it's an intentional scheme to rig the system while minimizing the chance of detection, allegedly, by focusing on the blue districts, right? So pump up the numbers so you pad your margins there. You can inflate Biden's numbers without raising the red flags in these historically Republican areas. If you did it there, it'd be obvious. Okay, there's no way in this Republican stronghold that a Democrat's going to win or get this many votes. So they're trying to make fraud nearly invisible, allegedly. And then this whole Democratic resistance to voter ID laws, which he explains why that is, that the Democrats, he says, fought the voter ID laws to protect ballot harvesting, was implying this, and other tactics by expanding mail-in voting and the drop boxes. You know, pay for ballots, this whole scheme, exposing how it took place, revealing that these operatives, they paid the canvassers weekly to gather absentee ballots, with the participants being treated like employees. You get a weekly paycheck, you know, turning the elections into these kind of transactional operations where the ballots are collected like wages, in a sense. The more ballots you get, the more money you make. And, I mean, if we can't see that corrupts the electoral process, then we can't see a whole lot there in this life. And there was a lot of coordination across multiple nonprofit organizations, which Dinesh D'Souza was identifying as he worked with that organization, True the Vote, who has come under tremendous scrutiny as well because they dare point these things out, True the Vote. And I've spoken to those two individuals with True the Vote in the past, at least I think a couple times, and they documented it. You know, they're pretty thorough in their documentation. They've got the receipts, they say. So this guy, Joel Caldwell, is hinting that the nonprofits were heavily involved in this, though he remained pretty tight-lipped on specifics on who these individuals were. And the movie 2,000 Mules also didn't identify who these nonprofit organizations were, but they were in these warehouses, that kind of thing. And he says that they played a major role in the ballot operations. So, and then the whole long-term strategy, the election interference strategy, and confirming that it wasn't a last-minute operation or an idea. The planning for this began years in advance, 2016. And you heard the journalist there saying, yeah, because a lot of people were very mad after Donald Trump won the 2016 election. So they had not only opportunity, but they had motive to engage in this long-term strategy so it didn't happen again in 2020. It wasn't a one-off occurrence, but it was, they say, allegedly, a coordinated effort to interfere with the election. And so all these political factions involved prioritizing, power essentially over the will of the people, and the use of union resources and networks. That is also something that's highly concerning. The union workers and maybe union money. We don't know that, but it could be. And it seems, it'd be implied that that was the case, suggesting that these unions and their members were involved in the ballot drops. And that would indicate a deeper network of coordination if the unions were involved there in Atlanta. And by the way, my understanding is Joel Caldwell was also a spokesperson for one of the unions there in Georgia in his past. So it makes sense there may have been some union involvement, which would raise a whole lot of serious questions about, the whole conflicts of interest. Unions shouldn't, they should represent workers. They shouldn't be manipulating elections or maybe representing a particular political party. So anyway, interesting. Steven Crowder, you can check him out and watch the whole video on his site as well. But courageous of him to do that. All right. Okay. Now to the election. A lot of battlegrounds, not just the states, but the counties within those states are really what matter in this election. So, we could look at Arizona, Maricopa County in Arizona, which flipped from Donald Trump to Biden in 2020, amongst some controversy there. But that is a critical battleground state, once again, this time around. And Kamala Harris hopes to ride the, Democratic shifts in places like other states like Georgia, Fayette County. In Georgia, where the shrinking Republican margins are giving Democrats hope there in Georgia. And also, let's look at Michigan, Saginaw County in Michigan. It's standing out, this particular county in the state of Michigan, as kind of a bellwether of how the election is going to go, because that county, Saginaw County, has voted with a winning candidate in every election since 2008. That was Barack Obama back then, against John McCain. So ever since then, they have kind of nailed it. So pay attention to Saginaw County and Michigan. Also pay attention to Grand Traverse County. It's northern Michigan, because the Donald Trump and the Kamala Harris campaigns, they keep going back there in that area, these small rural hotbeds of political ideologies that can turn and twist based on strategic campaigning in those areas. So as Election Day draws closer, all the eyes will be on these very, very decisive counties that could hand the victory to Donald Trump or Kamala Harris in a contest expected to come down to the wire. It is still razor thin. And I spoke earlier with political consultant and messaging strategist John Celik from Harbor Strategic Public Affairs. John Celik is the CEO of Harbor Strategic Public Affairs and joins me now on Tom Jordan Live. John, it's good to see you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
That's good to see you too, Tom. I'm loving your new show, and I definitely love that new set. It's gorgeous. You've taken it all to a new level.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, we spent some time on designing the set here, custom made here for Tom Jordan Live. So thank you for noticing that. Put some money into that. Appreciate it. All right. So these counties, this is what was surprising to me as you dig into more the granular level in these various states and battleground states. It really comes down to these more battleground counties. And so as we take the 30,000-foot view here of the entirety of the election in the country, when we talk about battlegrounds, whether it's Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, or maybe it's North Carolina or Georgia or the great state of Michigan, wherever it is, we're really focusing in on, aren't you, on these particular counties where those are the locations where the battles are taking place, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And this campaign has gone on so long that we've been able to go from just talking about who might run all the way down to who lives on what block, right? We're getting that granular about what's happening. And what you need to look at is, I always say, is money is we talk about, and polling we talk about all the time in elections, Tom. But time is the most valuable thing, because there is a date certain when this is all, we hope, over with, on November 5th. And there's only so much time for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to go places and do things. So it's incredibly instructive to look at where are they going? Where are they landing the most often? And we see a small group of counties within these states. They're going to be the swing areas. The easy explanation used to just be it was the suburbs. When we saw George W. Bush or something like that coming to Michigan, he was showing up in Oakland County or he was showing up in Kent County. That was always the sort of automatic, and the Dems had the control on urban areas, and that was when nobody even went to the rural areas, frankly. And that became something different that happened starting in 2016 when Donald Trump showed up and he went to Cadillac. and he went to Freeland, and he started going up north to these places. And you're like, what the heck is he doing? There's not enough people up there. But he ran up these margins in the rural areas that helped him tip the scales in 2016 and win the race. And so we're seeing a shift in where everyone's going. For Michigan, clearly, it's those blue collar areas, it's the places where people with lower college attainment levels who formerly were in the industrial workforce. We've got a whole lot of those areas in Michigan. Some of them uh, were in the Democrats' hand as recently as Barack Obama, and they've really moved away quickly. Some of them are still battlegrounds where their demographics are changing, like some of our up north counties we can talk about. But what you can tell for the most part in these other states where they're heading, there are a large amount of these either male non-college voters who haven't made up their mind or they're persuadable. And we're seeing both campaigns work really hard at that. And we know that's true also because we overheard Vice President Harris tell Governor Whitmer that when she was at Bell's Brewery last week having an Oberon.
Yeah, I saw that video, and then she noticed all these hanging mics all around her going, hey, we're being listened into right here. But yeah, she admits, and she knows full well, because they have their own internal polling, that she is struggling with the male voter, but she is doing well with the female voters. Is that also the case, that those two demographics in the state of Michigan?
Overall, Harris is winning amongst female voters, but it still is coming down to that educational divide. One interesting thing that I've seen in various stats from the academic world is there's a growing male-female split in our society because the percentage of men who get 4-year degrees has been stagnant for 20 or 30 years, whereas the number of women who are getting 4-year college degrees has essentially doubled or tripled in that time. And we're seeing that same split take place in who they're voting for and what their politics are. It's creating a lot of issues probably across society for men and women getting on agreeing on things. It's nice to think that we could put our political differences aside, but I'm assuming that carries some weight in some conversations when you meet somebody and you're trying to figure out how to plan a life. The split is growing, and so we're seeing the educational divide almost matches the gender divide.
And very interesting because you look at, and we'll touch on this one more point to this particular part of our conversation, but then I want to move to some of these counties in the state of Michigan. But this whole, like, the political identity, or the identity politics is a better way to say it, in these demographics and the difference between women and men. When you come down to the actual issues of the economy and safety and those types of things, it seems like most people would agree they want to be safer. They want to have a better income that matches, exceeds the rate of inflation, if that's at all possible. They want their kids to be educated well. But then we hear these, from the Kamala Harris side of the argument, that Donald Trump is specifically a threat to women. And then Donald Trump comes out and speaks to women and says, well, don't you care about education? Don't you care about crime rates in your neighborhoods? Don't you care about maybe illegal immigration? They seem to care about that and the impact on healthcare and those types of issues. Who has the better strategy in your view? I mean, what resonates more? Just the claim that Donald Trump is a threat to women, or that women also care about these other very important issues that affect all of us in real time?
Well, I think so many people would just like some certainty. That probably played against Trump in 2020 with the pandemic coming to a close and everything that was going on then. Now there's been more uncertainty because the whole reason for the Biden presidency was supposed to be certainty and calmness and order, and that's not what we've experienced. And there's an interesting set of polling data that CBS News put out over the weekend on Face the Nation, and they asked male and female voters who would be a strong president, who would be a weak president. Of course, for Donald Trump, men by 28 points said that Trump would be a strong president. And women said 50-50. Half of women said Trump would be a strong president. Now, I guess we can debate about what they see as strong, but the opposite was weak. So we know the
Yeah.
comparison was pretty blunt. And I thought 50% of women see Trump as a strong president in a time of uncertainty with prices, with the economy, with school, with the border. That's bad for the Democrats. And when you flipped over and they asked people about would Kamala Harris be a strong or weak president, of course, men were upside down on her. They didn't think she'd be overall a strong president, but women only gave her 55 to 45. It was only plus 10 whereas men for Trump was plus 28. So there's a lot of unknowns about Kamala Harris. We don't really know what kind of president she would be because she's had to abandon all her policy positions. She can't really embrace many or any of Biden's, and so she's been doing what we call the vibes campaigning, that she's middle class and Trump isn't. And I question how that'll work in the long run as far as persuading people to change their position, since I think everybody pretty much knows that Trump's a rich guy, and he's got a strong personality. That's not new news. The new news is her and trying to explain her. And we know that they're fighting over these, especially non-college male voters, but even some of the female voters. And it explains why they're going to some key counties in Michigan, Tom, that we'll probably want to watch on election night.
Yeah, I saw an interesting poll as well in terms of how men identify themselves. The difference between Republican men and Democratic men, and I think it was like 60% of Republican men classify themselves as very masculine, and I think for the Democrat, I think it was like 30% of men who are Democrat classify themselves as very masculine. So whatever that says, I don't know. That's just the numbers that came out. All right, let's go up north in Michigan. So as you touched on, Donald Trump visits these more rural locations. And he was just up in Traverse City. Beautiful location, Grand Traverse County. By the way, a location where Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, now lives. That's where he's making his
That's
home in
right.
that area. So it made me wonder, is this a red or a blue area? But clearly it's important to the Donald Trump campaign because he's been going up to Grand Traverse County as well. So how does that particular area in that beautiful part of the state
Yeah.
lean? Does it go back and forth? Is it a bellwether, much like Saginaw County is?
Well, it's showing us a lot about the movement, so I would say that it's in that realm. Both Grand Traverse County and right next door, Leelanau County on the peninsula have gone through a lot of changes, and how they go in this election will tell us a lot about things. We have to remember, essentially, along what now some people will refer to as the Cherry Coast, Benzie up through Petoskey area. Um, it's become higher income as more retired people and more remote workers can go there, higher college attainment level in those areas. We know if you want to buy a house along the lakeshore, it's very hard to afford something like that, whether you're on the lakeshore or even just a normal daily person in those zones. And all you have to do is start moving away from the shore, and it becomes redder and redder and redder quickly. So we're watching sort of a transition, and what we saw was, I had some notes here, Tom. In 2012, Mitt Romney won Grand Traverse County, where Traverse City is, with 55% of the vote. Then it dropped to 53 for Trump in 16 and down to 50.6 last time around. We also know that Gretchen Whitmer won Grand Traverse County, and we know that the city itself has turned very blue. And there's actually, if you get down to the state house level, one of the biggest spending state house races, contested races with an incumbent Democrat, is in that area. It's part of Grand Traverse County and Leelanau. So they're seeing every bit of campaigning from the upper level, because they've had Trump and Walz up there, or not, Vance and Walz up there already. Oh, and Trump, what am I saying? All the way down to the state house level with Betsy Kofia and Lisa Tremblay duking out in that zone. Now, Leelanau is even more of a fancy area now than Grand Traverse, so it's shifted to the point where Biden won it last time, but he only won it by a smidge. And so we're going to be watching those two counties for sure to see where if there's enough of the rural turnout in those areas to put Trump in the victory seat in Grand Traverse. I think it's going to be tough for him to win Leelanau based on what we've seen in the numbers the last two cycles.
Yeah, and the change up there, and I do wonder why that political demographic has shifted more blue the closer you get to the coast, which obviously means it's a higher priced real estate right there. It's beautiful up there.
Right, funny.
Is it a combination of things? Do you think it's that maybe some people are moving up there from places like Chicago? The wealthy there are moving up towards the northern
Yeah.
Michigan. Is that what's occurring? So we're getting some people, some influx from out of staters who are more liberal leaning in those states who are moving into those locations in Michigan?
For sure. I think the pandemic accelerated the ability to people to work remotely. And as much fun as we all have to go to Chicago for a weekend and go shopping or whatever, if we bring our bulletproof vests and or watch our backs, we can go shopping downtown in Chicago. I have family from there, so I feel like I can say that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but they've gone remote, so they've been able to move along the beautiful Lake Michigan shoreline, because anybody in Illinois, Wisconsin will tell you we have the better shoreline of Lake Michigan. We have the better towns. So we're
Hmm.
seeing a lot of that. The other part we're seeing, Tom, is a ton of union member retirees who also want the Michigan dream. They want to be able to live up north and live near the fun towns in their retirement. And so we've seen a lot of people move up there that are that in the past have been more likely to vote Democrat. So we're seeing all those things occur in an attractive area. I mean, there's microcosms of that in other places too. Even in Livingston County, southeast Livingston County, where Brighton is located, is now taken on tons of people who can't afford to or need a little more space than what's going on in Ann Arbor. And the same for Western Oakland County is moving out there. And we're seeing Brighton itself, the city, turn blue. And we're seeing that part of the county get a little softer as far as GOP goes. So we're going to be watching those counties really hard. The other place when we talk about time and scheduling and visits that we're going to be watching is Saginaw County. We've already seen the changes in the other two counties. When we talk about the tri-counties, talk about Bay County, Genesee County, where Flint is, and Saginaw County, where Saginaw is. We've already seen massive change happen there. We're like in Bay County, we went from, President Obama got 53% there in 2012. President Trump got 55% there in 2020. That switch happened. That's over with. If the Republicans are like even close to 50-50 in Bay County, then there's a problem for them. But I don't see that. And we've seen it at the ground level because they've already switched from a Democratic state house member to a Republican state house member. Genesee County still overall is in the Dem column, although in the rural area, they put a Republican in the state house for the first time probably since Ronald Reagan was in office. But it really comes down to Saginaw. When we look at the visits right now, I wrote down here 2 Trump visits, a Vance visit, 2 Harris visits, a Walz visit. Biden had visited there, and then JD Vance is back there on Tuesday. So Saginaw County is definitely a place we're going to watch because even though President Obama won it with 56% of the vote in 2012, Donald Trump won it by a point over Clinton in 2016, and Joe Biden won it by 0.3% in 2020.
That is remarkable. And so it's pretty much tied in terms of the visits from these presidential candidates. I do remember when Joe Biden visited up there and he wouldn't take questions from the press. We were all escorted out. Go away. He's only taking questions from the people in this party. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't help us at all. But anyway, that's another story for another time. He's no longer a candidate in this race. And it's very interesting to me because you look in that region, there's also these congressional races that are potentially could lead to, like you look at Dan Kildee up in the Flint area. He's retiring from Congress, and he's a very well-respected individual, very well-liked guy, has, some liberal policies in certain areas, but generally he's considered more of a moderate, although he's been going along with this, current iteration of the White House. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but he's stepping down, and good for him. I wish him all the best in retirement. But that opens up the race here, and you got a guy like Paul Young who's putting his hat back in the ring there, and he's a Republican, and he's run a few times, not ever able to succeed yet in these races. But what do you look at that seat in particular? Do you think that Paul Young there has a decent chance to flip that seat from Democrat to Republican?
He definitely does. I think that played a large role in Dan Kildee getting out. If you look at, a lot of people said Dan Kildee had wanted to succeed his uncle for a long time. He waited his time. He did all his work to be ready to be the person to take over that seat with that great last name up there. And by all accounts, if you meet Dan Kildee, he's a nice guy. I've met him a couple different times, randomly walking around, and he'll just actually shoot the breeze with you. Good guy. But he looked at this and said, I don't want to do this anymore. This is too difficult. It's taking up too much of my life. And it's too hard. So the seat is definitely shifting over. I think the National Republicans wanted one of the Shooties, either Senior Bill or Bill G. Shooty, who's now in the state house, to run in that seat this time around. It didn't work out, but Paul Young is definitely a true conservative. He's got all the money in the world, apparently, self-funding this race, and he's got now the support of the National Republicans. They're trying to hold on to their House majority. The issue is that Kristen McDonald-Rivet, the sister of Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald, is probably the best candidate the Dems could have put up. And she's been willing to run a campaign that kind of mirrors and looks like Hillary Scholten over in the 3rd District in Grand Rapids. If you watch the ads without any other instruction, you would wonder if they were Republicans. They're talking about tax cuts, which really is to counter the inflation issue, but they're talking about all these middle-class value issues, but especially when you hear them constantly talking about tax cuts, they sound like 1990s Republicans. They never say they're a Democrat, and they know that's what they have to do to win in those seats, so they try to paint the Republican as an extremist so that they might be an acceptable sort of moderate replacement in that zone. So she's putting up a big fight, and they're putting a lot of money behind her. So that is a seat we're going to be watching on election night for sure, because I think that could be a close one.
Okay, so to that messaging point, this is so critical because in a moment I want to talk about someone who's very, very good at that is Alyssa Slotkin. She makes herself sound very, very moderate, but then when she's elected, she votes far left, kind of in step with much of the Democratic Party, with a few exceptions here and there. But you mentioned Gretchen Whitmer. She won. I think it was up in the Leelanau Peninsula and Grand Traverse County. I think she won in 2022. That pace, but what she did it as, in my view, a stark contrast to the way she governed in her first term, painting herself as moderate. Suddenly, she was sounding like she was more conservative than she really was, and sure enough, she won that. And then she went far left again, and she even said, I'm going to put my foot on that accelerator. We're going all in now that we got the House and the Senate and, again, the governor's office and implementing all these radically left policies. The way they govern is different than the way they campaign. This time around, do you think people are going to look at what they said back in 22 or 2020 and what they actually did while in office and wake up and say, okay, this doesn't match. This is just an election year. This is just rhetoric. And they don't really mean what they say. Do you think more people are waking up to that, or not?
I think some are, but it is so difficult to actually get that information. Most of what we're seeing on the ads right now are about China and battery factories and NDAs and all this stuff. Um, there's only a limited amount of space in people's brains to explain what people's voting records are when they're there. And it ends up being whatever's the most topical, A. And B, what drives a lot of that, Tom, is the money that's being spent at the presidential level. It becomes difficult for any campaign, even a well-funded U.S. Senate campaign, to change the topic. Now, I'll say the U.S. Senate campaign in Michigan is more heavily focused on China and electric vehicles than the presidential race. But nonetheless, that's part of the issue. It's what Trump talks about every time he comes to Michigan. So we may have a Michigan flavor to it, but there's only a handful of issues that you can talk about unless you had $1 bazillion to try to carve out a space to address it. That gets more
Yeah.
pronounced when you get down to like the state house level. They have a really hard time trying to carve out their own issues for what they're going to talk about. They end up having to catch a train on what everyone else is being educated about at the higher levels of the campaign. Because you look at even just the Harris campaign said they're going to have $1 billion when it's all said and done. So it's hard for these smaller startups, so to speak, to really crack through and tell what those past voting records were about. So this whole Senate race right now seems like it would turn on whether voters believe that Alyssa Slotkin was cutting too many deals or was too close to the Chinese when it came to dragging these electric vehicle manufacturing plants to Michigan.
Real quick, so two federal races, real quick. Touch on the Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers U.S. Senate race in Michigan. How do you think that's going? And it's pretty tight, maybe more so than a lot of people had thought about. Where do you see this going up? We got a week left until this thing is wrapped up.
Yeah. The Detroit News had a poll out today, and they have it within the margin of error. Both candidates well below 50%. And if you thought you had this wrapped up and you see a poll like that, then you no longer think that you have it wrapped up. The issue all along has been, to me, in the most simplified way, is both Slotkin and Rogers held the same congressional seat in mid-Michigan. They both got elected a bunch of times there. Rogers had been a while, but nonetheless, that's not a very big media market. In fact, it's essentially tied with the Traverse City media market in size. So most people in Michigan didn't know who the heck either one of these people were. And so the only advantage that Slotkin's had is cash to run ads. She got in the race way earlier because Debbie Stabenow made sure that she announced her retirement early enough to take control of the primary, to prop up and allow Alyssa Slotkin to build a campaign. And she's been the only one on the airways for a long time. She was unmatched, or at least not really challenged financially, until we got to this last 4 weeks of the campaign, where we're somewhat seeing a financial parity on the air, spending wise. So what the Rogers team is trying to do is grab back some of these Republican voters, the softer ones who didn't know about Mike Rogers. They're going to vote for Trump, but then there's a drop off because then some of them are switching over and voting for Slotkin because that's all they heard from for a while. So the task for Rogers is to grab those Republicans back, and he's got the money now on TV to do that. And so we're going to see how effective all these messages are. But I think he definitely has a chance, particularly with Harris in the same Detroit News poll within the margin of error roughly at the same time. So if Trump does well in Michigan, we'll have Mike Rogers as a U.S. senator.
Very, very interesting what's happening here. Okay, one other federal race, and then quick assessment of the state dynamics here. But let's go to that 7th district that you brought up, the Tom Barrett race versus Curtis Hertel. This is a very important seat, congressionally speaking. It may play a role in, flipping, or not flipping the House, but extending Republican control in the House of Representatives. How do you think this? Do you think it's going to flip from a Democrat to Republican?
Yeah, I do. Tom Barrett started off with a huge advantage in name ID. This was the biggest spending congressional race, all money in last cycle in the United States of America, because they were trying to defend Alyssa Slotkin's seat. Tom Barrett was a great candidate for the Republicans then, and he is now. We see the trouble with the Democrats, where we see Curtis Hertel, who comes from a long line of elected officials in Michigan, Southeast Michigan. His brother is sitting in the Michigan Senate right now. Curtis Hertel is a skilled political operative. He knows what he's doing, but he's running ads saying, "I'm a regular guy," because Tom Barrett is a, quote, regular guy. Tom Barrett's wearing a hat that says "Dad" on it on TV. Curtis Hertel, literally on the screen, it says he smokes meat and drinks beer, like regular beer, not fancy beer, not craft beer. And so it's a battle to see who's the most regular guy, because Democrats are struggling so badly with men. And that would indicate to me that Barrett's got an advantage right now. He's built on that advantage from being in the race last time. And unless there's some kind of collapse by Trump, I think my guess is that Tom Barrett will pull that one out.
Yeah, Tom Barrett. I mean, Curtis Hertel comes out with an ad where he's, pulling the thing on the gas lawnmower as if he doesn't like EV mandates. I'm like, I don't think I know a little bit more about you than maybe other people do. It doesn't really. He's not all in on fossil fuels and coal as he's trying to proclaim here. And by the way, maybe that's why we didn't see him at Bell's Brewery with Kamala and Gretchen the other day. Maybe that's why
Yeah, right.
he was at the Coors factory in Golden, Colorado instead. Okay, the state house, the Senate in Michigan. Where do you see that going? It's a very slim margin in the state, but that slim margin gives the Democrats a whole lot of power. Where do you see this? How do you see that shaping up here in about a week?
Yeah, it sure does. I worked for 6 years as a staffer in the State House of Representatives back in the day. It's a very combative place. That majority has gone back and forth a million times in the same time frame that Republicans had controlled the state Senate for 40 years until this last election in 2022. It's still been a difficult run for Democrats, because it turns out being in charge is not as easy as just put your bills up on and they pass them. People talk about the MAGA movement being a disruptive force in the Republican Party. Well, the progressive movement and the Democrats side has the same issue, and they have anywhere you could judge on a certain day from 5 to 10 of their members who will refuse to vote on stuff, refuse to cut deals. They went there to be activists, not politicians, and they're not going to change their position. It's a huge headache for the Speaker of the House, Joe Tate. I say to anybody that listens, he has the toughest job in Lansing. It's tougher than the governor or anyone else, because he's expected to help carry a lot of Democratic bills since they control everything, like you said. And it's been difficult. It's been very difficult, particularly this year, to get things done there with only a slim 2-vote majority. So they have a lot of hot spots and problems on their side. And the Democrats out fundraise the Republicans, which majority parties usually do anyway. So they've had a lot more money to spend. If you're in Southeast Michigan, you watch Tom's show and you watch TV or watch football on Sunday, you will see nothing but TV ads for state house candidates that you don't even live near, because they have so much money they can run broadcast TV ads for a tiny house seat in Downriver or in Oakland County. No matter where you are, you're watching it on Southeast Michigan TV. So there's a huge amount of money being spent. To me, the battlegrounds for Southeast Michigan really are going to be in Macomb. There's 2 vulnerable Dem House seats there, Nate Shannon and Denise Menser. We're watching closely on those, because those could be seats that Trump wins. Last time around, they had Gretchen Whitmer winning those areas in Macomb County. This time, Donald Trump will be at the top of the ticket. Right over the border, over to DeQuinder, we go into Oakland, and boom, there's 2 House seats there for the Republicans that are under attack by the Democrats, Mark Tisdale in Rochester Hills, and Donnie Steele in the West Bloomfield. She has a number of communities around Pontiac over there. So they're both under fire there. So we're watching that RD Macomb versus Oakland kind of battleground. And the other zone, Tom, I would mention, which makes sense for these counties, these bellwether counties that we're watching, that were former industrial zones, like Saginaw, like Bay, like Muskegon, same deal. Won or lost by a point overall at the presidential level. The House seats in these areas are battlegrounds. So if we start along the I-94 corridor and drew basically a rectangular box from the west side at Battle Creek, where Democratic Representative Jim Hodsma currently sits, and we move one town over and we get to Jackson, where Republican Kathy Schmaltz lives, but is under attack by millions of dollars from the Democrats and the mayor of Jackson, Dan Mahoney. We have to, of course, skip over Ann Arbor like it doesn't exist because it does not match anything else along I-94. God bless them. I love them. They have good food.
Yeah.
And then we get into that downriver area where we got a mess of Republican and Democratic seats all on 94 to downriver down to Monroe, that are under these battleground watches. So these former industrial zones that are shifting to Republicans. Eventually, they'll probably have all Republicans sitting in them. Right now, there's some Democrats that are under fire. There are some Republicans that are under fire. Jamie Church's in the heart of downriver is the number one battleground that we're watching in that area. So there could be a number of seats flipping along the I-94 corridor, and that will make the difference in the majority in what kind of enjoyment in life Gresham Whitmer gets as governor for the last 2 years of her term.
Yeah, and maybe she will take that foot off the accelerator just a tad, depending on what happens. It's a very consequential election coming up for the state. And obviously, it's a federal election as well. The Senate races, congressional races, and of course, the presidential outcome. All of these very, very consequential. And I don't think anybody watches it more closely than you do. John Celik is the CEO of Harper Strategic Public Affairs. John, it's so good to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Look forward to being back.
All right, look forward to it. And he will be back because John Celik is a pro. I mean, just look at all the details he gave there. So he's watching the polls. He understands all these various races around the state of Michigan, but on the national level as well, both federal races and local and state races as well. I want to give you an update. There's a new poll from this Michigan Senate race between Mike Rogers and Alyssa Slotkin. This is from the USA Today Suffolk poll. It has Slotkin 47. To Mike Rogers, 45. That is still within the margin of error, and that came after another poll showed a tie. Several polls showing a tie in this race. The latest one on Monday showing that. When it comes to the presidential race, when you're looking at the national level, Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, Trump is leading in a number of polls, and the real clear politics average right now, the RCP average, is Trump up by about a half a point. That's how tight it is. But one came out from Atlas Intel that shows Trump up by 2. We got Harris up by 1. And a tip poll, Reuters has Harris by 1. Morning Consult, Harris by 3. And then we have Rasmussen having Donald Trump up by 2. In several polls, including New York Times, Siena, we got Emerson, we got CNN, showing that this is a tie between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, with the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and CNBC showing that Donald Trump is up on the national level. But if you look at more of the various states, so in the state of Michigan, again, this battleground, it is a tie between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. That's from USA Today, Suffolk poll that just came out today, USA Today. So it's a tie between Trump and Harris. Nebraska, we got Trump up by 15 points. Obviously, that's a very red state. And then you got another one with the, let's see, New Jersey, of course, Kamala Harris up by 20. And then back down to, of course, that Senate race, which I just told you about, Slotkin up by 2 within that margin of error. So these are a lot of very close races that we'll be watching. And a reminder that we'll be broadcasting live on election night, following all these returns as they come in from 8 p.m. to noon. Right here, Tom Jordan Live, broadcasting on YouTube and X and Facebook. We'll be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. And it's a party, so you're welcome to come here and be a part of it. It's downtown Brighton, Michigan, in the western metro Detroit area. If you're in the region, come on by. We'd love to have you. We'll have some hopefully hors d'oeuvres and some food and some drinks, and we're partnering with the next door restaurant called Label, right next door to us, and they got a ton of space there as well for overflow, and there's monitors out there where you're watching the returns together here on Tom Jordan Live. Love to have you be a part of it. 8 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time here in Brighton, Michigan. All right, we got some comments and some questions I'd love to get to. Let's bring them up. Cameron has been watching those. Let's start with Taz. Hey, Taz. James Craig, the State Board of Canvassers rejected their nomination due to they could not verify signatures. Is it me, or does this smell to high heavens? Oh, it did. It was absolute fraud, and that was confirmed. And remember who found that out, that suddenly James Craig... So for those who don't know, James Craig is the former Detroit police chief, and then he ran for governor of Michigan in 2022 as a Republican candidate. And he, along with 4 other Republican candidates for governor, were kicked off the ballot. And at that time, James Craig was likely the front runner in that race. But they discovered somehow that they had been a target of fraudulent canvassers and election gatherers and signature gatherers for these various petitions. And the signature gatherers were engaging in fraud, and they were forging all of these things. And guess who found out about it? It was a guy named Mark Brewer. He's a Democratic activist who somehow came across these fraudulent signatures as he dialed in, and he got 5 of them kicked off the ballot. And then we had to say, okay, and it was like almost half of the signatures were fraudulent. And then at the same time, especially in 2020, the Secretary of State of Michigan was not verifying signatures when it came to the ballots and the ballot applications. She just said, let's just presume they are all valid. And that was her directive to the clerks in the state of Michigan, later to be overturned by the state Supreme Court, saying that was illegal. Jocelyn Benson, what you did. But again, by that time, I've said this many times, it was too late. The election had already occurred, so the deed had been done. So, yeah, it does smell to high heaven. If the petition gatherers were so adept at falsifying signatures, how could they not be adept or as equally adept at the fraudulent signatures in 2020, which nobody was apparently checking those signatures? Taz, great comment, great question. Thanks so much. Let's go to another comment here. The question, let's go to Robert Paulusiak. I know, Robert, I butchered your last name. I apologize. But thanks for your grace in that. I believe, Robert says, that the polls are fixed in the vice president's in the vice president's favor. She is nowhere near as close to Donald Trump as the media is saying. Yeah, it seems a little strange. I mean, to me, the question becomes, how can somebody who was never elected, had never garnered any votes, never won any primary election, none whatsoever, including in this race, she was just installed by the Democratic Party to suddenly take over Joe Biden's place in this. Never won anything in these elections. When it comes to president, she didn't win any primary back in 2020 either. I mean, she's never done anything. How could she be so tied with Donald Trump in this and so high up in the polls? It does make me wonder as well. I have no proof, no evidence to say that these polls are incorrect. But it also boggles my mind that somebody who cannot answer a question specifically regarding the economy or illegal immigration, and she blames all of those things that happened under her watch on Donald Trump, who has not been president for the past 4 years. In fact, if you look at his policies while he was president, he succeeded in all those areas and then some, in international trade and foreign affairs and national security. He was stellar. And then Kamala Harris and Joe Biden take office, and they drive this country down, further down. I mean, it's horrendous what's happened when you look at the economy in the last 3.5 years. You look at the rate of inflation, and the wages have been falling. The real wages have been falling. People can't keep up, and that's just one issue. But they legitimately allowed millions of illegal immigrants into this country. They wanted that to occur. And if you don't believe me, just look at their previous statements. You know, look at Kamala Harris's statements on how she views illegal immigration. She doesn't think it should be criminal, that they should be allowed to come in, take away the criminality of illegal immigration. That's what she believes. And then you have a major member of Tim Walz's campaign saying, and these other Democrats in the country saying it is racist to have any type of border security. That should never happen. And if you believe in border security, you are inherently a racist. That's how they believe about it. They want to open the floodgates, and they would. I think what they want is, United States, Canada, and Mexico to be all one country, maybe Central and South America as well. It's just all one big happy family. And so that's why you have so many Venezuelans in this country now, and people from Honduras and El Salvador, in these very dangerous, demonstrably dangerous countries. Huge numbers of the population are now residing in the United States of America. How did that happen, you ask? Because they wanted it to occur, and they are facilitating it. They have been for 3.5 years. Robert, thank you for that. Very much appreciated. Yeah, I don't get why the polls are so close either. It doesn't make sense to me. And maybe they're not as. I know the media loves Kamala Harris. I think 80% of the media coverage is very favorable of Kamala Harris, and it's like 90% negative towards Donald Trump. He's the one answering the questions. She is not. How could the media love her so much? I don't know. Let's bring up another one here. Cameron Harris watching those as well. So Carol Moroni Feigl. This guest is impressive. He certainly is. Talking about John Celik. He gives boundaries and street names, indicating which race and candidate to watch. Very informative. So I apologize. I'm off the screen here. I think, but Cameron, our good friend here, just turn it back on. So I'm back with you. Carol, thank you so much. Yeah, he's great. John Celik, I've known him for, it's been probably 6 years. Back in 2018, I think was the first time I met him. And at the time, he was running or representing one of the gubernatorial candidates in the state of Michigan. So he's very savvy. He knows his stuff, and that's as he mentioned earlier, he served as on the staff in the state legislature for I think 6 years, and he's just been heavily involved at the granular level in state politics, and seems to love it because he knows so much about it. So yeah, we'll keep having John Celik back in the program. He's a gem. And Dennis Darnoy is another guy. I love him. And a lot of our political consultants, Rashini Rajkabar, very savvy individuals. And we only want to align with the very best. So those are them. And there's a few more out there, which we'll get as well. Carol, thank you for watching and for chiming in. Very much appreciate it. Let us know if you want to come to Tom Jordan Live's Election Night Watch Party. Again, broadcasting 8 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time here in downtown Brighton, Michigan, in the western side of Metro Detroit. A beautiful small community where we have our studios here at Speakeasy Studios in downtown Brighton. And if you don't want to come or you can't, just watch the live stream. We'll be watching those returns as they come in around the country. All right, got a great show tomorrow. We hope to see you then again, broadcasting live, 9 a.m. Eastern. Lives on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, YouTube, X, Facebook, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find Tom Jordan Live. Thank you for your support in this, in terms of just watching them and sharing them as well. Until tomorrow, have a great day. God bless you. We'll see you then.